Hi again. In Anthony Hoekema's book, The Four Major Cults, in his section, The Distinctive Traits of the Cult, we've reached the seventh distinctive trait, or rather the fifth. This is the seventh video we've done on this section. And that is the group's central role in eschatology. The last distinctive trait of the cult I would like to mention is this. The cult plays a central role in the eschatological climax of history. The cult is convinced that it has been called into existence by God for the purpose of filling in some gap in the truth which has been neglected by the ordinary churches. The birth of the cult thus marks the final climax of sacred history, the beginning of the latter days. Eschatology thus plays a determinative role in the theology of the cult. It becomes the arena in which the glorification of the cult will complete itself. The cult is therefore the messenger and way preparer for the imminent return of Christ. It is God's partner in the drama of the end time. It is the ark of safety for the coming flood. It is the instrument of divine judgment on unbelievers. It shall finally triumph in the sight of all the world as the group particularly favored by God. This type of procedure Kurt Hutton calls a cultic perversion of biblical eschatology. Whenever the cult has developed an eschatology, he continues, it places itself in the very center of it. The drama of the last things thus becomes the means whereby the cult is glorified and all its enemies are overwhelmingly defeated. Though the cult may now be small and insignificant, when the final climax of history arrives, it will receive from God the place of honor it deserves as a reward for its faithfulness to his commandments. The antithesis between God and Satan, which has run through history, will, in the last days, reach its climax as an antithesis between the cult and the rest of mankind, particularly the church. As we attempt now to see how this trait is revealed in the cults we have studied, we must first make an important exception. Because of the absence of a real historical dimension in Christian Science, the latter has no general eschatology. Hence it cannot be precisely fitted into the category just described. Christian Science denies that there will be a literal second coming of Christ, a general resurrection, a final judgment, and a new earth. Though there is a kind of individual eschatology in this system, there is no general eschatology in the sense of a final dramatic climax of history. Yet Christian scientists do manifest a trace of the characteristic in question, since Mrs. Eddy contended more than once that what the Bible calls the second coming of Jesus Christ actually coincided with the rise of Christian Science. By statements such as these, Mrs. Eddy did, in a sense, place Christian Science in the center of eschatology. It will not be difficult to show the presence of the trait under discussion in the other two cults being considered. Mormons very definitely place themselves in the center of the eschatological drama, giving themselves a position of special privilege in it. The Mormons, God's latter-day saints, consider themselves the bearers of the restored gospel, the gospel which must now be proclaimed by them to all the world as God's last word to mankind. Before Christ returns, there will be a series of gatherings. Ephraim or the Ephraimites must be gathered first to prepare the way for the rest of the tribes of Israel when the time comes for them to be gathered to Zion. Since most Mormons today are said to be Ephraimites, it is obvious that the gathering of Ephraim is going on at the present time. Ephraim is being gathered to Zion, the gathering place on the North American continent. The lost 10 tribes will later be gathered to Zion, where they will receive crowning blessings from Ephraim, that is, from the Mormons. During the millennium, Christ will rule over the Mormon Zion as well as over Jerusalem in Palestine. At this time, Mormons on earth will be joined by a heavenly group, the city of Enoch. Also during the millennium, Mormons will preach to the non-Mormons who are still alive and will be baptized for the dead who have lived from the beginning of time. In the final state, Mormons who have fully kept the commandments of the gospel will enjoy the highest grade of blessedness in the celestial kingdom. Non-Mormons can enter the celestial kingdom only if Mormons have been baptized for them. Most non-Mormons, however, will spend eternity in one of the two lower kingdoms, the terrestrial or the telestial. Jehovah's Witnesses teach that the kingdom of God was not established until 1914 AD, that this kingdom is now the ruling part of God's universal organization, and that this kingdom is comprised of Jesus Christ and those members of the 144,000 who are now in heaven. These heavenly members of the anointed class, who were, for the most part, Jehovah's Witnesses on earth, not only rule with Christ now, but are actually changed from human beings to divine beings. Between 1918 and the Battle of Armageddon, a judgment of the nations is taking place, in which all those who do not accept the Jehovah's Witness message and who show no kindness to its bearers are doomed to destruction at Armageddon, a destruction from which there will be no reawakening. The Battle of Armageddon will therefore be a stupendous victory for Jehovah's Witnesses, who will be the only survivors of this worldwide catastrophe. Armageddon survivors will have a favored position on the renewed earth during the millennium. Many of them will be made princes. Jehovah's Witnesses who have died before Armageddon will have the privilege of being raised from the dead before the rest of earth's inhabitants. Those who were active in the New World Society before the millennium will take a leading part in instructing newly resurrected people in the laws of Jehovah. For Jehovah's Witnesses, therefore, the climactic antithesis of history will be that between God's true people, the witnesses, and all others, including the churches of Christendom. Whenever a religious group places itself in the center of the eschatological drama, it makes itself guilty of spiritual pride. Overlooking its own shortcomings and sins, it magnifies the sins of others. It blandly assumes that because of its own superior worthiness, it has become God's special favorite. When Christ came across a similar kind of pride among the Jewish leaders of his day, he rebuked it in no uncertain terms. I say unto you that many shall come from the east and the west, and shall sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom shall be cast forth into the outer darkness. Matthew 8:11 and 12. Put in a link to the counterfeit kingdom of the Watchtower. It's the first video in a series we did, a Paradise Lost playlist, Paradise Lost for Jehovah's Witnesses, 19 videos in all. So I'll put a link into the playlist as well. Next time is Seventh-day Adventism, a cult. See you soon.